It was more about this thing of like, come into the brotherhood. We see you, you belong here, we're going to give you an identity. And this, anybody who's looked at radicalization, this is a common thread. And what we're not seeing, though, is that this thread now is easy, or these threads are easy to pull in society by actors who understand us better than we understand ourselves.
Woo, welcome. You have now entered Mad Warfare, mutually assured distraction, where we explore the weird, terrifying, and sometimes hilarious ways war is fought today, and how we can all protect our... NATO took years to define cognitive warfare. Meanwhile, the U.S. government still can't explain it, and your news feed has been doing it since you started doom scrolling this morning. So we're all doing great. Welcome back to Mad. I'm Jocelyn Brady.
I'm Sean Anthony Guillory.
Our guest today helped build NATO's cognitive warfare concept from scratch. She once told a NATO general to his face that he wasn't doing his job, and she still gets invited back. Her background spans cognitive psychology, Army service, international development, and advising special forces. Woo! Please welcome Dr. Tanna Krewson.
Hi, thanks guys. Happy to be here.
Hey. Okay, so hold up. Army, refugee work, NATO cognitive warfare. At what point did your parents just stop asking what you do for a living?
I try and explain it to people of kind of this whole thing of like influence and what happens when you're on social media and how, the agendas that people have online. But I don't think I've come up with a very easy answer for that, that question over a meal or with people that I don't know yet to explain it, because most people I don't think really understand. It hasn't been socialized in public spaces as well as it has been in military and government spaces.
Which even then seems like there's a lack of agreement on how to talk about this, let alone address it.
Yes.
So there's a fight over the fight. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Sean. I always complain to Sean about that. The term warfare, is that what you call it?
Term warfare. That's a term that I actually picked up from John Bignell in another episode, where a lot of the kind of fight is about, like, AI is a great example. If somebody wants to argue about, like, is this AI conscious? Whoever gets the definition that everybody agrees with in terms of consciousness, pretty much the rest of the argument is it just flows like, okay, it's either a yes or no, depending on that definition. And sometimes a lot of the fight is the definition. That fight is worth having sometimes, but sometimes it does kind of bog down in terms of operations from happening. But yeah.
It's difficult as well because you wind up in these endless revolving discussions about definitions and what you're actually talking about and what the lexicon means and who says what, and this government uses it this way and this one. It's difficult because oftentimes you're talking about the same things, but you can't even get on the same page because the definitions are just slightly different.
And I think one of the biggest things like I hope in terms of the audience getting from you today, you were in that fight where folks saw this thing called cognitive warfare, and maybe they came from PSYOP, maybe they came from information operations, maybe they came from other kind of like targeting. They're like, that's kind of my thing. Like, and you were part of that kind of step where folks ended up agreeing on this thing, which for a lot of folks, that just it seems impossible to almost come to that consensus for a lot of things nowadays. And any kind of advice you have to get to that consensus, I think, would be valuable to our audience.
I think cognitive warfare has been an interesting one because the term itself, at least within NATO, came from the fact that it was the former four-star general who was over NATO ACT wanted this concept on cognitive warfare because the French had done a lot of work on it. So a lot of the thought leadership originally came out of France. And the community of interest that was established in the beginning felt that the term was somewhat problematic because a lot of what we're talking about is defensive in nature. And so the question then becomes, so are you saying governments are doing cognitive warfare on their own populations, if you call it that? And so that created problems, but this general was very set on that term. But what's interesting is, as the term kept being used, it's become a term that you hear a lot now, and I think it is increasingly being used, and I think it would be very difficult to go back on that term. But the big challenge is this thing of you wind up stepping on toes inadvertently because there's this misconception that cognitive warfare is synonymous with psyops, info ops, stratcom, but it's not. The way that there was an initial cognitive warfare concept within NATO that was ultimately scrapped in 2024. And then they wanted a whole new concept in 2025 that actually better reflected what we're talking about. And so that concept defines it more as this fight for cognitive superiority. So cognitive warfare is not the tools that we use, it's the fight that we're in, which better, when you define it that way, allows us to talk about it from a whole of society standpoint, from a defensive standpoint. So the fight itself is cognitive warfare. What you do to address it is what we already have: psyops, info ops. You work with your public on resilience through military public affairs, those kinds of things.
Am I going to go down a rabbit hole? Yes, I am. How do you define cognitive superiority?
You might, and it's interesting because this, at first, are we allowed to swear on this program?
We can
We
too.
can.
Yeah.
Again,
Okay.
like, yeah.
Okay, cool. Literally, my response when I heard the term cognitive superiority the first time was, what the fuck does that even mean? Like, I'm a superior, like, I have superior cognition to you. I'm a superior, but it's being, I understand it more now. It's cognitive superiority is this long-term quest for, having better systems, having better understanding, having resilient forces, resilient societies. That's that quest for cognitive superiority. NATO would look at it as the components that go into that are with cognitive advantage. And that's that day-to-day fight that militaries and governments are doing to maintain narrative advantage, psychological advantage, so that there's cohesion within nations, within the alliance, there's societal resilience. And so that's kind of, militaries like to use these terms like superiority and dominance and things. And I think we all could probably have a good laugh about the ridiculousness of that in some ways. But I think this idea of like having this endpoint of like, we want to be better, stronger, faster than our adversaries. And in this case, that means we have resilient populations, we have resilient personnel, we have properly trained personnel, we have systems in place, we have fit for purpose technologies that allow us to get to these places. That's, in my mind, what's kind of encompassed in that.
Yeah, and to analogize, and I actually would feel free to critique even this kind of analysis. Sometimes when people kind of, it's always like, okay, can I get like Doctor Strange meets Professor Xavier meets the Hulk and put them into a blender and that's what's going to be? But I usually kind of explain folks, I'm like, for folks of age that kind of remember, it seems like when we talk about cognitive superiority and cognitive advantage, I think more of like what Bugs Bunny does to Elmer Fudd or what the Roadrunner does to Wile E. Coyote, where it's just that one little thing that they kind of think about or they switch it up, and that the their adversary or is not necessarily thinking of, but they always have that thing to kind of turn in their favor, and that's usually, at least in my simple kind of modeling of it, in terms of like, that's an analogy I usually kind of use to folks on that as well. Yeah.
You did also just call us old. I'm just
Oh, well,
putting
all right,
that out there.
again, like,
Like,
I'm probably one of the oldest
for
one
those
here.
of
Again,
us
that helps. That helps.
Part of the fight.
Yeah.
So outsmart, outmaneuver, outplan, outstrategize. Those would be examples. Being ahead of what somebody's going to try to throw at you and not being susceptible to mis and disinformation, perhaps.
Yes.
And
And I think oh, go ahead.
no, go for it.
No, I think there's a growing recognition, and I'm happy to see it, that there is something going on with technology and in our societies and with information that I think Western governments are struggling to understand what to do with. In this idea that if I'm a malign actor, I don't have to cross conventional national borders anymore to create chaos in your society, to create unrest, to create election interference, to create coups, to you can do that from afar, and it's cheap and it's fast and it's effective, and I can, you go through society to do that. And I think the question has been, what is a military solution to that type of upheaval that the end result is truly military and political objectives. That's the target, but they're going through society to achieve those things. And I think that's a difficult thing that we're still struggling of how do you address that as a Western nation while still staying true to your democratic values.
Especially if, just for example, a country where people in positions of power benefited from the divisiveness caused by such warfare being waged.
Well, it's hard because we see this attribution is very difficult. The militaries like to focus on attribution for there to be a response. We have to properly attribute what's taking place and who's responsible.
Yep.
But in this space, it's more ambiguous, and oftentimes what may have started as a foreign narrative or foreign influence gets picked up in the local population, and it's very difficult to tell what's normal societal evolution and what's a foreign power potentially tinkering with how things are functioning in your society.
Yeah, and I think the key word is also in that you mentioned a couple times, like to see it, like when bullets or missiles are coming, or even just the after effects, you can see what that is. I guess even with some cyber stuff, like, oh, my website's not working anymore. These functionally, you can like see and act. These things right here, in terms of they're at least functionally invisible, and to even point to folks like here it is right there. That seems to be some of the difficulty to kind of show folks like, okay, this is what's happening. Do you see that's what it is? This is what we're talking about, cognitive warfare. This is an attacker. This is what they're trying to do. That kind of aspect of visualization of this. I don't know if that's some of the first steps or even like step zero to kind of help kind of everyday folks kind of see it, because once they can kind of see it, like, oh, maybe they think they can address it or at least better identify it.
So when I talk to military audiences, and even upper level leadership, so 1 to 4 star generals, I tend to always tell them, like, I'm going to do this a little bit differently. I'm going to talk to you as individuals rather than senior leaders, and we'll move into the strategic focus, but I'm going to start off talking to you as people. And we talk to them about, like, how many of you touch your cell phone within 5 minutes of waking up? And it's almost, I've done this in rooms of like 600 people, and it's pretty much the entire audience. And we talk about, the addictive nature of these tools and why they're designed that way. And I've started to see that if you can get people to understand how they themselves are vulnerable and how it influences their thinking, you can get them to see how it operates at a strategic level. And it's very difficult. Once you can get people to see how the ecosystem operates, it's hard to turn it off.
Yeah, it's those things that feel lacking is just there's so much talking at and not enough bringing people in and showing you. Because, like an example, I saw somebody, this is a really ridiculous example, but some lady a year ago or so was talking about chicken is being washed wrong or air dried or some. And it's don't trust it, blah, 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 blah. And she was hitting on this nerve because I had done a lot of research on CAFO, big farming and all this. And I was like, oh, this sounds awful. And my inclination was to believe her almost immediately. I wanted to share it. And then I had to go, wait a minute, is there actual research in here? Who is she citing? And it turned out it was all just bunk. But it was such a good example of seeing myself immediately feeling compelled to want to share something that I had no idea where it was actually coming from and what the intention was, other than to enrage me enough to spread the word.
It was targeting your pre-existing beliefs, and that's very powerful. And what people don't understand when you don't understand enough about how the brain works and how the information is targeted at people is that if you have these pre-existing beliefs, your brain is designed to want to believe things just because they confirm that rather than whether they're true. And so it's very difficult, even in working with government audiences, when I say things like the truth doesn't matter to whether people take in your message or not. And governments like to do this whole like, we're telling them logical facts and it's just very bland and it's very straight. And I'm always trying to tell them like that's that has no bearing on whether people even can absorb your message. Because if your message doesn't confirm what they already believe, they're likely to dismiss it. And so there needs to be other workarounds with that. But there's a big difference between what I think the threat landscape that military and even government audiences see and understand, and then the lack of awareness that our populations oftentimes have about how their social media use is playing into this ecosystem. Um, and and I think governments are struggling on how to convey that because it's complicated.
Yeah, one of the tactics is just just yelling, screaming at things. It's misinformation, it's disinformation, and like
Oh yeah.
it's a witch hunt. They're trying to get a medal for saving society. What's the problem? Where's the problem in that?
I really dislike the term disinformation because it's created a huge problem because have started using disinformation or even misinformation, which are two different things, by the way. But we've started using them to cover anything that creates unrest in our information environment. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not actually accurate because disinformation is simply a tactic that can be used in wider campaigns. It's just one thing. So a lot of times the information that is actually creating upheaval, it may be factual, but if it's angled in the right way, that it's targeting people's identity and their emotions and making them feel something, um, that's a lot of what's creating unrest. But the challenge is when we classify everything as disinformation, then that means that the solutions to disinformation are things like debunking, counter narratives. But what if the information is true and it's simply angled in a way at certain populations who are prone to believe it to begin with, and it creates unrest? Then what? So if we classify all of these things of everything creating problems in society is just fake news, it's just because it's false. That's not true. Um, and also, whether information is true or not has no bearing on whether people take it in and believe it. So just my soapbox.
Why do you
No, that
think
makes
so
sense.
many people? I see this in my own work too. Why are so many people obsessed with? Well, this is the fact, and we need to be logical. We need to be rational, and that's the only way to convince people of what is true. Yada yada yada. Why is that so pervasive? Do you think?
I think if you talk about, from a democratic perspective and the values that our, governments hold, being factual is very important. Putting factual information out to the public is very important. But it always seems that there's this factual information doesn't have to be boring. It doesn't have to be bland. It can still do things like make you laugh or make you feel sad or make you feel. And so while it's important to be putting out factual information, um, we need to be better about understanding how people actually take in information. No different than all of us at school. We don't send kids to school with bland white walls and make them sit in lines and there's colorful things on the walls. You do fun games to teach them math things. You do it in a way that their brains can actually take that information in. And we're not doing that very well, I would say, from a government perspective.
Speaking of telling people they're doing their jobs wrong, you were at a NATO Special Forces event. Was it last December? And you told
Yeah.
the general to his face, "You're doing your job wrong." What happened?
I guess I forget. So sometimes I go to these events, and that particular one, I was the only civilian non-NATO person there, um, which is always interesting. But it also gives me the freedom sometimes to say things that potentially I couldn't say if I were uniformed personnel or I was part of a chain of command, where there's a level of, oh yes, yes, General, yes, yeah, that's brilliant, yes, and I don't have to do that. But also, I unfortunately can be a bit direct and not always realize it. You could say probably a bit American and not always realize it. So I was on a panel with him, and we were talking about this whole discussion. We were taking questions from the audience. I had basically questioned him on, like, isn't it your job? Governments need to do a better job to communicate with the public what the threats are, what the threat landscape is. So, I often do, and I've written about it before, this whole idea that we spend so much time on our cell phones. And if you go in public, start paying attention. The amount of people that are sitting on trains, at restaurants, in airports, and they're just on their phones and they're scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And they think that they're having their own thoughts. And because we all believe that we're logical people and we're having our own thoughts, but what they're not realizing is oftentimes the news articles you're reading, the YouTube videos, all of these things may have been produced by an adversarial actor who is creating content in a way that they want you to have certain thoughts, and you won't even realize that it's happening. And the military understands this. I think, I go to a lot of these conferences and we talk about this threat landscape, but we're not able to convey it to the public very well because most people just think, what's the big deal? Like, TikTok makes me laugh. My wife really likes watching YouTube videos. My kid, and we're not seeing the gravity of what it's doing. And oftentimes what it's doing simply because we're uncomfortable sitting with our own thoughts. Like, it takes a conscious effort for me to sit in a public space and not want to reach for my phone, to stave off the boredom of sitting in a public space with nothing to do. So waiting for an airplane, doing something, the first thing most people do is reach for their phone and pull it out because it's uncomfortable to be bored. It's uncomfortable to sit with your own thoughts. You might have to think about things you don't want to think about. You might have to be uncomfortable waiting at dinner for your date to show up. And so it's easier to deal with that human awkwardness with social media than it is to really think about how you're feeling. And so this has very, very real geopolitical consequences. And I think we need to find more accessible ways to communicate that to public audiences.
It's just one of those things where, yeah, just like that kind of action in terms of like folks say, really, that's a national security concern. Again, it's just kind of hard to explain for folks. Like, yeah, it actually is. And again, being able to kind of take boredom and have patience for a period of time is almost considered a superpower in this day and age.
Cognitive superiority.
It's part of the toolkit. It's part of the utility belt, Batman.
What are we losing when we don't? We used to, in years past, sit with our own thoughts and we had space to have big thoughts. Think about it even with senior leaders now. Constant barrage of emails, notifications. People, they don't even have the space anymore to sit and have big strategic thoughts. And then they go home and it's a barrage of information. It's 24-hour news cycles. And the choice to set that down and check out of it has become something that has to be a conscious, almost difficult choice rather than this is just normal. I just come home, my work is there, I set it aside, I come home, I have space with my family, I can have space for my brain to have big thoughts. What are we losing in the world that we live in with that absence of space to have those thoughts? And I don't know the answer to that, but it makes me very sad.
Those eureka moments and the quiet spaces where the insights really come. It makes me think of the rats in the cage. They have a really boring environment and they're just given a choice to, you can nourish yourself or you could just have the cocaine drip, and they just cocaine drip themselves to death.
Yeah. Yeah.
Entertain yourself to death. I think every single one of us, everyone listening, relates to this, where you just like, I'm uncomfortable. You're not even registering you're uncomfortable. You're just like, well, I'm doing nothing. I might as well be scrolling.
And the hard part is this is where the cognitive part comes in. I mean,
Hmm.
this is our brains are kind of wired to do this. If you think about your brain as this machine that's designed to conserve energy, conserve resources. So it's going to use as little resources as it needs. So if you think about like it's going to opt for the things that conserves resources. So less critical thinking, less time spent, in the logical parts of your brain. But the challenge is we all like to believe that we're really rational, logical thinkers all the time. Um, and there's a neuroscientist named Lisa Feldman Barrett, and she talks about this. She says something like, "I want you to think of your brain like a drunk scientist, in that it's oftentimes highly irrational, and it's irrational because its goal is to conserve resources in your body. So unless your brain doesn't always want to think logically, that takes up energy. And all of us anyway, there are differences in our brains whether we even enjoy that process. Not everybody enjoys the act of learning or seeking out these things. And so you're given then, our phones, and you suddenly have this little machine here that gives us dopamine surges. It makes us feel good about ourselves. It gives us validation. Why wouldn't we opt for that? Like, I'm having a shit day. I just want to check out and sit on my phone and see how many likes I get. I'm going to scroll funny videos and things that make me happy. And you're just going to absorb that content. And it's, I sound probably a bit like a conspiracy theorist to an extent when you talk about that there's actually like geopolitical actors on the other side of some of these things. But there are. And I don't mean everything you're watching online, but if I'm a malign actor and I know that I've got this captive audience that I can reach quickly, cheaply, I can use AI to do it now. It is a problem. We're just accepting it as a problem means we actually as individuals have to change things about our day-to-day lives, which is tricky.
Yeah. And part of it is, again, like, for them to see it like, okay, this one's a malign actor versus, those just, our domestic kind of
Mhm.
goofball. Because, again, they may be informed by other kind of actors as well. But the other kind of aspect that I don't know if this is what also makes it hard is a lot of things we're talking about. There's this intersection both with just like economic kind of like, marketplace free choice, but then also this aspect of, I'll hold off on using the term maybe like political warfare, but these kind of like political aspects where like, oh, it's my freedom of choice or things like that. But to, you know, but if you kind of put on this cognitive warfare hat, some of these things that just may seem absolutely innocuous, and even in terms of like content, I think less people laugh in terms of the things that we've been saying since the first show. Where if you're talking about like, you know, top information operations forces in the world, you got to put the Swifties up there. Another one I kind of got a laugh not too long ago was there's this very popular kind of streamer named iShowSpeed, and when he had that big kind of streaming thing in China, I think in terms of like younger Gen Z and Gen Alpha, talk about like really about face in terms of like their perceptions of China and seeing it even as better in the U.S. I think that's really kind of like underappreciated. Wow, this goofball with the dreadlocks and like really that guy? Yeah, really that guy. And I don't know if it's just something that's recognized, but again, he's just so a lot of folks just like a very silly content creator. I'm not even saying he had like, nefarious plans. He probably got paid, Chinese actors to kind of do stuff like that, but I can't prove that.
That thing of who's on the other side funding some of, the influencers that people are watching, that is taking place. And there's a lack of awareness of the extent of it. And if you want to, I mean, really go down the rabbit hole, money is the core of all of it because even
Mm.
all of these platforms are designed to make them more money. They're monetizing your attention. That's what they're there for. They're there to make you addicted. They're there to get you to spend as much time on their platform as possible. And so, at the core of all of this is money. And even these influencers that that they may be saying things that they don't agree with at all, but they can see in their metrics that, oh, when I say this, I get a lot of money. So I'm going to say more of that. And that's this. And it's not as if I mean, the hard part is when you look at people, if you ask people, like, do you think this is a problem? Most people are like, yeah, it's a problem. But then if you say, do you think it's a problem with you? Are you vulnerable? People will be like, oh, no, I'm really smart. It's not me. It's them. Those people are stupid. But what I really want people to start understanding is your IQ has no bearing on this of whether you're susceptible to influence or not. I don't care if you're a three-star general or you're a college professor. You may have honed your ability to be mindful of your thoughts and like Jocelyn, like you said, like why do I feel like I want to share this all of a sudden? Like I should probably research this first. Maybe those people might be more prone to doing that, perhaps. But it's people don't fall for influence in these things just because they're not smart. And I hear that a lot, where it's just this idea that like those people are idiots. And um, I don't think that's necessary. That's not all that's at play.
Again, in terms of teaching folks more about this, yeah, it's just in the way of like so some of it is in the way of economic interests or even what folks feel is free speech. I feel like that's where some of the tension is as well.
Well, and maybe I mean, I kind of look at it as free speech. Yes, the goal is not to limit free speech, but the goal is to teach people to question what they're receiving. And I don't mean that in the way where people are like, do your research, like that's thrown at you, like, wake up, people. I'm so sick of hearing that. Um, I'm so tired, like
Sheeple.
calling people sheeple. Yeah, yeah.
At the
But
sheeple.
like if you can teach, and this the hard part is this is long term, right? Anything when you talk about social norms change is not like it's going to be done in this election cycle. Go. It's can you teach people to like if they like you, Jocelyn, receive information and it makes them feel something, I want them to be aware that they just had like I just had an angry feeling or I had an icky feeling about this information. And then I want them to pause before they hit share and wonder why. And like, why did I just have an emotional reaction to this? If I did, that probably means that the person on the other side of that information who created that content wanted me to have that emotion, which means they wanted me to do something with that emotion. And so it was created in a way to create that specific response. And that's what I want people to start being more aware of, that if you're reading a news article and it makes you suddenly have an icky feeling, start questioning why. Like, is there language in that news article that's leading, or is there a subtext to what the headline says that then gives you pause and like, this makes me furious. Why am I so furious? Does that mean that it's true? Does it mean that it's false? Like, that's in my mind kind of the goal, like not to stymie free speech, but to create critically thinking, more resilient populations who can question when they have an emotional response. But that's it's kind of mindfulness, which is a touchy-feely term.
Call it
No,
cognitive
But it's
no
true.
superiority, and all of a sudden,
Yeah.
people are
it got
interested.
some muscle to it. One or two kind of really brilliant points that Tanna just kind of mentioned right there. That aspect where these things kind of like take time over time versus you see this also in the cyber where I think now a lot of folks are kind of dismissing this idea of what would a cyber version of Pearl Harbor look like. Okay, it's not going to look like one big attack, just like with cognitive warfare. Some of the folks that expect like, okay, I'm going to have this one dynamite message and it's going to be like an atomic bomb and it's going to change everything. No, these things are like over time. So that over time aspect I think is brilliant. And then the other aspect that the ball is now coming back to you, Jocelyn, that able to like recognition of one's emotion, like Jocelyn has time and time again, if she says she had a magic wand for one thing, it would be helping folks get more education on those kind of feelings. But I'll let Jocelyn, again, the ball's finally to you.
Oh man, yeah, this is what everybody should be educated on this stuff. And I'm gonna selfishly now run something by you. I made this thing as I get. This is actually why the show started. I get frustrated and then I complain at Sean about something, and he already had an idea for it. So in this case, I made up this thing called the FIB test. Like all the acronyms we use are too long. People don't remember them. Well, can we do something in 3? And so the FIB test, feeling. Do you feel something? What do you feel? And let's look at that. And then the I being identity. What is the identity that they're tapping into? Is it being a good soldier? Is it being a caring wife? What is that thing? And then benefit. Who benefits from this? From you believing in these things and having these feelings. So I don't know. Let's get rich. Put it out there. That's my.
No, that's I mean it's spot on. Like when um if I train personnel on this, I mean these are some of the things that I'm like a- asking them to pay attention to, and it's weird at first because I'm like I'm talking to you about emotions, and I know that's weird in this context, but you cannot understand yourself or you cannot understand other populations if you don't understand their identity, what emotions they attach to that identity, and then oftentimes behaviors are quite predictable if you understand some of those things. And then when you're teaching, yeah, when you're teaching people to recognize that stuff, I love the fib test
It's a fun
idea
word.
because it's true. Yeah. And it's a perfect little acronym.
Yeah, I also think about with people who are resistant to talking about feelings, it's just like showing them, if you didn't experience pain, you'd be dead. If you look at an organism that doesn't have any reaction at all to the sensation of the world around them, they would be dead. They would cease to exist. So if you just think of even saying embodied feeling, that's probably too much, but just the sensations that go through your body and mind are the things that keep you alive. So if you don't understand those, you're as good as dead or easy to manipulate. I don't know. That just came top of
Well,
mind.
there's a physicist, I think he is, called Leonard Mlodinow, who's written a couple of books. One is called Emotional, the other one's called Subliminal. And they're two of my favorite books. And he gives an example of trying to show that actually, we have this thing oftentimes kind of in Western context where we believe that we are logical or we're emotional, that they're separate things. So like when we go into a work environment, we're just logical all the time. And I have logical thought because I'm in work or in school. And then I might have emotions when I'm upset at my spouse. But they're very separate for us. They're not this linked thing. And so he talks about in there, he gives this example that I always use, where he's talking about that actually our emotions are what create space for logical thought. And so you cannot separate them. So the example he gives is that, let's say I'm starving, I haven't eaten in several days. My body is obviously going to be like, I need food. I'm going to find food. And so I get to my refrigerator, and all that's in there is a package of chicken. And I open up the package of chicken, and I'm starving and I'm ready to eat it, but it's spoiled and it smells awful. My body is naturally going to have a feeling of disgust and I won't be able to control it. That's the natural reaction my body's going to have. So what that emotion does is it creates space for you to start having logical thought about what do you do now? Do you, on one hand, you start thinking, I'm so hungry, I haven't eaten in days, I might die, I need to eat this food, I'm willing to take the risk, I don't care that it's spoiled and might make me sick. Great. Or you logic, it's spoiled, I can't eat this might make me more sick than I feel right now, I need to find something else. And so what he's trying to point out then is that the ultimate response that you come up with is not in the absence of emotion. It's not separate from that. It's that logical response you've come up with is specifically because you had an emotion, and that emotion gave you space to have that debate with yourself about what the right move is. And so this impacts our work environments. This is the decisions that are being made by senior leaders in military spaces are also being filtered through their emotions and their self-interest. And so it's all part and parcel of the same thing. But we oftentimes, partly because it's cultural, I think we separate it out when oftentimes we're up against adversaries who don't separate it out, that their emotional lives are very much linked and seen as part of this. We quote Sun Tzu constantly in military spaces, but don't actually fully understand half the time what he was talking about in this, patience and, a thinking response and factoring in all of those things of being a more cunning adversary. It's all part of emotions, logic. They go hand in hand.
Well, he was a man, so he obviously didn't have any feelings. We're men, don't feel things. Um, Weaponization of gender.
Stupid.
There's a new Netflix documentary that just came out about the manosphere.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, quite good. Louis Theroux, I think his
Yeah,
last name
yep.
is. But it's actually quite sad. Like some of these guys had like these awful upbringings and awful, and they're talking about like I didn't believe that I was anybody until I started watching these influencers, and like that's exactly they are a they. But the thing is, and then when I worked in the gender space and I would say we need to be looking at men in this, I would get shot down because they said we can't do, we can't do any more research looking at men. And I was but like it's sad. You can support women, but also think that the hand that's given to a lot of men from a young age is also sad.
I mean, in the name of cognitive advantage,
Like,
like let's one would want to know that, correct? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, back to if we educated everyone, all the children, about things like emotion and how they can get manipulated, I think we'd all be better off for it. And there's other countries that are doing a good job of this, right? It's like how to spot when people are trying to target you or when you're being manipulated. Who are some examples that maybe we can look to, or what can we learn from the ways these other countries are developing cognitive superiority and resiliency?
I think the one, it's funny because I just learned about this one program yesterday. I was talking to a researcher who's doing a report on cognitive warfare, and she was saying that in her research, actually, the only nation that has curriculum for young children on emotional regulation is Denmark. And it's literally starting at a young age of teaching them to have empathy for other students, to be able to regulate their emotions when they're feeling like suddenly they feel an emotion, to be able to recognize it and then respond in a more potentially nuanced or muted way. And she said that it's really interesting because in her research, that's the only nation that so far really has something that's intentionally designed for that in their national curriculum. And I knew, but I think it's kind of, if you look at the Nordic countries, I think they're far ahead in some of this of recognizing the importance of this in daily life, even for young children. But it's very touchy when you talk about the need to educate young children. Um, because people get really touchy anytime you talk about like educating their children. And so if you look at, I mean, even Sweden's approach to total defense is actually really interesting, the work that they're doing from a military perspective, but it hasn't, I'm not fully certain of how far it's filtered down into their education. But if I had my utopia,
Interesting.
I would be, I mean, you would be starting with children in teaching better critical thinking skills and recognizing that I think children are capable of it too. I had in my one of my doctorate courses was a teaching and training course, basically teaching you how to be a professor. How do you create your syllabus, course plan, all of this, and we had to come up with a proposed course. And I proposed a course for undergraduate students on looking at ethics and human rights. So this idea of that, like, young kids often have this rose-colored glasses view of the world that like, but human rights. And I'm like, yeah, but when you promote one group's human rights, you risk violating another's potentially. So where is the ethical line there? Um, and the professor for that class told me he thought that was only a doctorate level course. He was like, there's no way kids in their undergraduate could be able to do that's too advanced for them. And I was like, I think you're wrong.
Wow.
I actually I won the argument too. Um,
Very good.
and wound up using
Very
it.
good.
But I was like, I think you're wrong. I think you're doing a disservice to younger people of thinking that they're not capable of these critical thinking skills at a young age. And I think you could go even younger,
Yeah.
and that we need to do a better job of it.
Like, go look at Greta. I mean, listen to Tupac. What are you doing? These people are so young.
Well, and I think,
It,
frankly, if you talk to any parent, like any parent is consistently, regularly blown away by the stuff that their kids come up with. That you're like,
yeah.
I had where I had no idea your brain worked that way. Where did that come from? Hence, every parent is like, my child is a genius. He's so brilliant. Um, but it's because of those moments where you're kind of struck by like you're way smarter than I think. And there's a lot of research actually showing this with really young children that they're actually a lot smarter than we think they are.
Yeah, and how we
And
we beat the creativity out of them is one of my favorite studies. That whole NASA looked at it for over 30 years, I think. They were looking at kids 5 to 6 years old, where this is just on divergent thinking. So, like how many different use tests and things like that. And they saw 98% creative genius at the age of 5. And they tested it over time. And as the kids are going through school and learning what is the correct answer and what is the incorrect answer, and this is the bubble that you fill, and this is the wrong thing to do, by the time they were in their early 20s, that completely flipped. So it's down to 2% of that population considered creative genius at that time. We're just like killing these skills or the courage, perhaps, to. It's like a double-edged thing. You're saying don't think like this, don't be creative, and also shut up. So wah,
I
wah.
mean, the most vulnerable populations in your society are the ones who feel like they've been left out of the national narrative, or they're feeling such touchy-feely language, but unseen and unheard. But it's truly it's biological. We're wired to want to belong. We're wired to want to feel seen and heard. And most people, statistically, care more about feeling heard than they do about being right. So a lot of these groups are not like, oh, we must be right. It's the thing. They just want to be heard. And when they're not heard, that's when a malign actor can easily come in and be like, come on in. I hear you. This is why, like
Use your
ISIS
microphone.
part, yeah. And we looked at, I worked for the Carter Center for a few years, kind of during the height of ISIS. And I didn't work on this project, but one of the projects in the center was looking at ISIS propaganda. And they found out that actually, when they went through hours and hours and hours of this footage, that a lot of the propaganda was more about belonging than it was about Islam. And it was more
Mm.
about this thing of like, come into the brotherhood. We see you, you belong here. We're going to give you an identity. And this, anybody who's looked at radicalization, this is a common thread. And what we're not seeing, though, is that this thread now is easy, or these threads are easy to pull in society by actors who understand us better than we understand ourselves. And because we have our democratic laws, which are different depending on the country, the government's ability to talk about these things or to really speak to the public about how this is operating is in some cases quite limited, or the government's ability to even do research on what's going on in their own populations to understand, like, okay, we have these gaps, we have these vulnerabilities. That makes us open targets for an adversary who this is easier and cheaper than bombs and bullets. And
Mm.
oftentimes it's coming through actors who, I mean, if you look at a lot of what Russia does, they farm a lot of this out to actors who actually they don't really care, but they're getting paid. So they don't necessarily have a huge stake in it. Like they don't care who gets elected in the US elections. They don't care if there's unrest, but they're getting paid. And so it's yeah, and there's just not enough understanding about how these operate in everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
So with all this wonderful news and seeing how the dumbest incentives win, just the most money can win. What, what gives you hope?
Yeah. um, it's hard right now because the challenge is I see this stuff everywhere. I can't unsee it, which is the problem. When you start to see it, it's very difficult. But I do have hope. Naively, probably, I believe that people are inherently good, which is potentially very foolish of me to still believe that. But I do. And you see this stuff around you all the time that um what was I watching? It was a social media video the other day, and it was something with kids, and I don't remember what they were being given, but the kids were so excited. And it was something like people just being awesome human beings. That's all around us. And that gives me hope that this stuff, this manufactured environment that we're all living in online, isn't real. Like, for a lot of us in our day-to-day lives, my life does not resemble anything that I'm really seeing online. Like, I have a small group of close friends who I care about. We make each other laugh, and they warm your heart. And then you work and you go to sleep, and that's your day. And a lot of that gives me hope that that's still real, that that human connection is still real. And so half the time when I teach on this or I talk in government spaces, I'm still saying we cannot forget the humans. Like, that's what this is still all about, is human beings. And if you keep the human in the loop, you keep humans centered and stop um, prioritizing, thinking that AI is going to be the solution to all of these human ills, or like that gives me hope. If I remember that, like, human beings, for the most part, are nice. And I've traveled all over the world, and there, even to countries that people think would be dangerous, and there are lovely people everywhere. Like, I have met nice people everywhere. And that gives me a lot of hope. And most people are just trying their best.
No notes. Yeah, you could drop the mic. Yeah, again, that was a slow motion, like 2001 Space Odyssey theme.
But maybe that's it. Like,
Dropping
maybe
the mic.
coming back to the basics of, like, when you're reading these articles and it seems like the world is in chaos and it's all shit. And don't get me wrong, it is kind of in chaos right now. And there's a lot that's shit about it. But if you come back to the basics and remember, sometimes this manufactured outrage and the doom scrolling, it's not really real. Oftentimes, it's just people who want you to believe that it is. But if you come back to the basics of your own life and the people you love and the people around you, like, that's really, at the end of the day, what it's all about. And so if we can keep that centered anytime we're feeling like angry and icky and outraged, then you're in a pretty good spot, I think, to go up against it.
The luxury of outrage.
Because it makes us feel alive, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, especially if there's not a lot going on. I walk outside, it's a nice day. There's a kitty, there's a dog, the park, there's children laughing, and that's but where's my rage bait? I need to spread fake news about bad chicken.
You
Well,
missed it.
but if you think about it, when you get to, like, we're all middle age on this call, um, you get to middle age, and I think there's a feeling that a large portion of people in middle age would recognize, if it's that whole, like, is this it? Like, this is it? I work, I go to bed, I have a family, like, is this it? And all those things that you had planned when you were younger, and the future was so bright. So if you if that's how you're feeling, something that invokes rage and really strong emotions and makes you, like, yeah, makes you feel alive. When on a day-to-day basis, most of us probably don't feel very alive, and we go home, we've got spouses that are this saying, like, they may not understand it. It's just, there's a whole, that's what I mean. It's human ills that are underneath a lot of what's taking place. We're just not um, seeing it individually as such.
Go out there. Let yourself be bored, kids.
Let
It's
yourself
true.
be bored. That's
Tanna, is there anything that you'd like to give a shout out to or promote, or exciting news you want to share or leave our audience with?
Nothing to promote at the moment, which is, I don't know, maybe refreshing. I'm not here promoting a book. I'm just here because I care about the topic and really care about people starting to understand it. So feel free to connect with me and reach out to me if you feel like having a conversation about it. That's what I'll leave with.
What is the best way for
yeah.
people to reach you?
I have a website. It's very cringy, I think, to have a website, but I do have one because that's how people find me. So it is tannakrewson.com. And you can find me there. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn, which is my self-aggrandizing mouthpiece, and where we I get to say it was such an honor to be invited to speak at. So you can find me in those places.
Then let me have my little bit of cringe and just again, thank you for coming out because I know this isn't something you usually do in terms of like coming out these shows. I think we just had a hell of an episode. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. I
Thank you.
appreciate it. It was really nice. I'm glad you guys asked me.
Let's see if I can hit this stop and not ruin everything.
I've come to talk with you again.
Come and be inside my head.
Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you cancel me. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you cancel me. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you cancel me. It's only a matter of time till we all get canceled and say. It's only a matter of time till we all get canceled and say. It's only a matter of time till we all get canceled and say. Cancel me, cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you can cancel me. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you can cancel me. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you can cancel me.